Running Sentences presents A Cold, Cold War. Part 5. Chaos. Matters get more complicated as everyone tries to find new footing with a bad situation. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, or any actual events is purely a coincidence. The author would also like to apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of names, characters, and places, as he's only good with English, and even that is a bit of a struggle most of the time. Copyright 2021, Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Sergei Petrov plodded about the Soviet attaché office. He'd been busy looking up paperwork and not paying attention to the commotion that was going around the place. Something about a shooting at a train station. But he didn't care about that. It's just all noise to him as he finally found the particular file of the large agencies with the KGBs who would have connections to the area. He'd gotten back to his desk and was just settling in when a young junior agent came streaking up. "Mr. Petrov, have you seen the boss?" "I haven't. Have you tried his home phone? And why do you need to get in touch with him?" "The matter at the train station. We need to make sure that it isn't one of ours, and well, Vasily, he knows the police and can get information without stepping on toes. I'll attend to it, but find Vasily and quickly. It's not like him to be gone and out of touch for long." He got up from his chair and grabbed a hold of the file so that it wouldn't disappear on him and had it out. At the train station, Misha had made her way partially across the train station lobby before a police officer came rushing towards her. She stopped as he approached. "Miss, you can't be here. You need to leave." She let him approach even closer, then grabbed his hand and twisted it. She soon had the officer's hand behind his back and grabbed his pistol from his holster. Without blinking, she fired 2 shots into the man's back and then dropped her grip. The officer fell limply to the ground. She turned and hurried her way towards the train platform, realizing the noise was going to draw much attention. She fled even faster towards the platform, hoping that there were no other officers around. Sergei, meanwhile, had pulled his car into the parking lot of the train station, looking about for familiar faces, someone he could talk to and get in the lowdown on what was going on. But they all looked like regular officers who, if they were on the payroll for information, weren't high up enough for them to know anything. He spotted 2 officers leading away a man who looked distinctly like Frank Gordon and putting him in a cop car. Deciding it was best to stay to his car, he pulled into a nearby parking spot and sat and watched. There was no need to rush about, as the cops would not take kindly to him butting into the matter. But watching, they would barely notice, as they were too busy dealing with other matters. The train station platform that Misha found herself on was the one that she was absolutely certain was the right one. After all, there was the body of Henry Cart still lying on the platform. There was, however, no train where there should have been one. The sound of footsteps behind her made her snarl in frustration. "This is Detective Yarmir of the Prague Police. Stop where you are and put your hands up." She dropped the gun and kicked it off to the side, and then slowly turned, putting her hands up, and went to her knees. "I am Misha Ivanov of the Soviet Republic of Russia. I claim immunity as the agent for the embassy." 2 officers hurried over with their guns drawn on hers, one of them holstering their weapon to grab their handcuffs and covering her carefully. They soon had her in cuffs and were taking her away from the scene as under the careful watch of Yarmir and Gregory, who had rushed in. Outside, the mayhem had calmed down a bit, and Yarmir emerged with Misha in handcuffs along with Gregory. They, however, came to a stop when they saw the captain bearing down on them. Gregory took a look at the captain and then grabbed Misha and headed her towards the nearby patrol car. The captain stopped in front of Yarmir. "What did I tell you? To get some rest. But I can't when a cop is in need. Besides, I only came here when I heard the call go out. I would believe you about this, but there are already patrol officers saying that you were helping Gregory and were investigating when I told you not to get involved. Now we're going to have to deal with the government agencies demanding to talk to their people. What a mess." The captain looked about the place with a disgusted face to show his displeasure. Yarmir opened his mouth to say something, but the captain turned to glare at him once more before marching off. Alright, you officers of the law, let's clean this mess up, and no talking to anyone about it. Yarmir watched as the captain went off, yelling at his subordinates and wondering why he'd gotten off so easily. But he wasn't about to wait for another round of talking to, so he hurried off towards the nearby car so that he could get into the interrogation of one Frank Gordon or Misha Ivanov. Across the parking lot, Sergei had wandered away from his own vehicle, looking at the cars around him, and came to a stop and tried the door handle to Frank's car. It easily opened, and he slid into the driver's side. "Are you all right back there, Mr. Miller? Surviving? What are you doing here?" "Looking into what's happened. My boss is missing. A train station has gotten shot up, reportedly. Frank Gordon has been arrested, and to top it off, I believe Misha Ivanov, the person who wanted to defect, is now in police hands. But that's of no matter to you, sir. You don't need to know anymore. You might ask questions, and you seem to need help. But don't worry, I know of a place." Sergei brought down the window visor to find the keys tucked up neatly inside. He picked them up and got the car started and carefully pulled out of the parking lot, trying not to draw any attention. Unintentionally, Sergei found himself following the cars containing Frank and the one that contained Misha as they drove down the road. It wasn't that he intended to follow them. The makeshift backroom hospital that he was headed towards wasn't far from the police station, and thus he was following them. He was surprised to see that they were slowing down and that traffic seemed to have disappeared. He put the car into a higher gear and moved to past, only to see 2 cars blocking the road. Ahead of them was 3 men standing outside of them. 2 held handguns and were walking towards the slowing cars, while a third, with a VZ-58, leaned against one of the cars blocking the road. Sergei quickly got his car back into line with the 2 in front. Then the cars came to a stop, and so did he, just a little bit further down the road to make himself a little inconspicuous from those that were in front of him. Yarmir looked out at the man standing next to the driver's side door. There was an STB badge pressed against the window. The driver was looking at him from the driver's side for his orders. He signaled that the officer should wind down the window with the crank to see what the STB wanted, and so the officer did. "As an agent for the STB, I'm looking for 2 illegal agents, one Misha Ivanov, KGB, and 1 United States agent from some backwater agency. He goes by the name of Frank Gordon. If you could all step out of the car, please." The police officer looked over at Yarmir. "Do as he says." The 2 then step out, with the officer hurrying to the back door to let Misha Ivanov out of the car. Sergei watched as one of the gunmen came up to the driver's side of the car and glanced in. Then he waved his hand to him to signal that he should stay in the car, and then waited as Sergei gave the thumbs up before turning to deal with other matters. "What's going on?" "STB, I believe, Timothy. They're looking for people." "Shit." He rolled himself from the backbench seat to the ground to hide himself further, and the thump drew Sergei's attention as he glanced backward to see what was going on. "What are you doing?" "Hiding." "It's more suspicious with you laying down there than sitting up properly." Timothy slowly got up from his spot as they watched the events unfold in front of them. Frank, on the other hand, found himself out of his police car and looking carefully at the 2 agents of the secret Czechoslovakian police. They looked over Misha and then at Frank. One of them grabbed Misha as Yarmir took a step forward. "Wait a second." The other agent approached Frank, ignoring the detective. "You're Frank Gordon?" "Yes." The agent took a step back, raised his pistol, and fired, striking Frank in the chest. Then, with utter precision, turned and marched back to the car blocking the road, only to be intercepted by Yarmir. "What are you doing?" "My job. Now, unless you wish to have an accident, you should find your captain and talk to him about the matter." The agent pushed him aside and hurried on to his vehicle. The 2 cars blocking the road soon cleared and headed off, with Misha in tow. Yarmir in a huff stormed off to his police cruiser, and he, along with the other police car, puttered off as well. That left Sergei, who pulled up and rolled down his window. "Need some help, Frank?" Frank lay on the ground staring at the morning sky, which had quickly headed towards afternoon, the way the sun was going. He glanced over at Sergei, then the back open door, and Timothy poked his head out. "Are you okay?" I don't know." He slowly and tiredly got up and stumbled his way into the vehicle. The car was soon setting off as Frank did his best to close the door and then looked over at his friend Timothy, who had taken on quite a pale color to go along with his usual pale complexion. "Why didn't they kill you, Frank?" "If I had to guess, it was more work than it was worth. Shooting an American citizen and then having to clean up the mess. Few people want to jump through the hoops and figure out who to blame. It's more likely to shoot and tell me. It was more likely a shot to tell me to go away, as it had caused them too much commotion." He looked down at his chest where the bullet hole was. It was on the side and had barely grazed him, but it still hurt a hell of a lot. Yes, those are fun. Been in a situation like that myself. Shut up and get me to the clinic, will you? Timothy doesn't look like he wants to survive. Sergei pressed on the gas, which caused the engine to whine a little, but it eventually picked up some speed. The car sped along until it hooked a sharp turn down an alleyway and then another sharp turn into a back alleyway that could fit a truck through it. There wasn't any trucks parked in the area, but there were more than a few empty kegs to dodge. Sergei did so deftly and pulled the car to a stop in front of a back door. That door opened to see what the squealing of brakes was all about as Frank and Sergei both hopped out to try and get Timothy out. Seeing this, the man who'd opened the door rushed over and helped them rush the Brit into the building. That evening, the bartender/doctor finished the last stitches on Frank's wound on his side and sat back to admire his work. It was patchwork, but it was suitable as a man slathered on a bandage and cover the wound. Frank was doing his best to look anywhere but at what was happening for fear of turning a little ill. Then the bartender had finished up and stood up and looked Frank in the eyes. "Try not to move around too much, and if possible get the wound tended to by a real doctor. I only cleaned and stitched the site since that's all I could really do. And what about my friend?" The old man is looking at him. He worked as a doctor during the war, should be fine, but you never know. "Can I see him?" "I'll take a look. But for now, go through to the bar. Sergei wanted to see you once you got fixed up." Frank slipped off the back table that had been acting as an operating table or bed or whatever it was supposed to be. He flexed his injured side, but tried not to move it too much as it was stiff and it hurt a hell of a lot. He didn't want to catch dirty, angry looks from the burly bartender who'd done such careful, dainty work to get things nice again. When the bartender moved to begin clearing up the mess, Frank stole out of the room and headed to the bar. The darkness of the window into the bar told Frank that the afternoon had disappeared and given way to the evening. He felt like this shouldn't surprise him, as it takes a while to get any medical work done, but still, time had went and vanished on him. A clap on his back brought him back to attention as he stepped into the bar and found Sergei was on his left. "They finally finished with you." Sergei held out 2 beers and offered Frank one, who took it suspiciously. "Yes, but I fear I'm now in line for many questions." "Yes, you are. Sit down and take a drink." The two directed themselves off to a booth on the side. Neither of them took to talking in hushed tones, as the place was nearly empty, and what few people were there were lopsidedly not really in the right mindset to listen to anything other than their own worries. "So, what's your first question, Sergei?" "Was my boss Vasily a mole for your side?" "I don't know." "You do... What do you mean you don't know? By telling me that, you confirm my suspicion that Vasily was working for you." "I was never told who the mole was because they didn't trust me that far. My boss only gave me a number to call should a situation arise. I called, and when time came, my boss showed up with a man and a woman, and then they vanished. I never got to see who they were." "I don't buy it, Frank." "That's fine. I'm not asking you to buy it. But if your boss is missing, I'm sure that's enough suspicion for you. Anyway, shouldn't you be at your offices and making sure things are in order since you're second in command?" Sergei offered a shrug. "I've called over there a few times. Things are moving along, but they're not my concern right now. You are, and the damned mole is as well. Well, Mole is either dead, killed by Miss Ivanov, or escaped. I don't know which it is, and I can't help you any further. The door to the outside world was thrown open, and 2 cops strolled in with a piece of paper. They took one look around and made a beeline straight for Frank. Frank Gordon, you're under arrest and will be transported to the station at once. Frank held up his one good arm as the other one was stiff. Okay, I'll come. Just don't put me in cuffs. My other arm here can't take much pressure as I was shot by your secret police. The officers didn't seem to care, but neither of them reached for their cuffs, and Frank looked over at Sergei as he slid out of the booth. The Soviet agent looked pissed and then slid out of the booth as well. I'm coming with you. I need to see a Detective Yarmir about some things, and I don't want to let this agent out of sight. The cops glanced at one another, and Frank began heading for the door. Well, you can't come with us, sir, but you can certainly follow us to the station. Fine. Let's say we do that, then. Frank was thankful that he was in cuffs as they were marched down the sidewalk towards the station. The formerly lit-up sky was fading and providing some darkness to hide the whole thing from what few strangers were around. The group soon arrived and walked up the steps to the police station and into the lobby. There it was all business as usual, with none of them stopping as they headed straight for the stairs to head upstairs. They got up to the second floor where the detectives and the captain's office were stationed. The detectives were all busy as Frank was marched across the floor towards the captain's office, with Sergei curiously following behind, surprised that he hadn't been stopped yet. The officers pushed Frank inside and then stepped aside and waited. Sergei looked between them and realized that he should probably go in as well, and did so. As he entered, though, the door was slammed shut behind him. The bleary morning rolled around all too early for Yarmir as he sloshed about in his bedsheets trying to sort himself out. There was a constant shrill ringing coming from somewhere, but it had to wait while he worked himself free. It took a minute of untangling before he could spring up from his bed and rush to his phone. Hello? Yarmir, it's the captain. You're needed in my office on the double. Get here quickly. The line fell dead and Yarmir slowly took the phone away from his ear. A few minutes later, he found himself sprinting about his bedroom and bathroom, fixing himself up to go into the office. A record 4 minutes later, for him anyway, he was out the door. Yarmir did his best to look presentable as he rushed across the lobby of the police station. It was a good thing that he was mostly ignored by those who were occupying the lobby and getting processed through the system. He still had to stuff his shirt in to make himself look good, but that was easily done as he went up the stairs into the detectives department. Upon arrival at the detective section, a few pairs of eyes shifted over to see his arrival in the doorway. Then a few arms pointed towards the captain's office. Yarmir didn't waste a second as he headed towards it, though he stopped when the door was flung open by the captain himself, who took a step out and then spotted him. There you are. Get in here, now. The captain disappeared back into the office, and Yarmir, of course, chased after him. When he got into the office, Yarmir stopped and stared at the sight of the exhausted Frank Gordon and Sergei Petrov sitting in the chairs across from the captain. Neither of them looked like they wanted to be there anymore. Yarmir glanced over. What are these two doing here? Getting a long lecture. Sergei shuffled about to look over as well. Mostly a lesson on the STB and how they're keeping an eye on everything. It's not something I wanted to learn about. And, Frank added, and how it would be best for me to move on, at least for me. They didn't say Sergei is probably fine since he's a good Soviet citizen. STB probably doesn't want to start incidences with the big powers that be. Yes, probably don't want that. Who cares about the secret police? I've been told to avoid them and not worry about them and to stay away from the likes of you spies. And yet, here I am, caught in a spy ring. Frank and Sergei merely looked over at the captain, who had a rather large portion of vodka thrown into a glass, and then sat back in his chair as he took a swig. "Captain, the police needed someone to watch over them to make sure that things aren't getting out of hand. That is my job as both your captain and overseer for the STB. Now, I've tried to keep you out of this, and I've had some success, but this matter now needs to be closed and hidden from view. Mr. Gordon and Mr. Petrov, if you would wait outside, please." The two got up and shuffled off towards the door, grateful to get away from the office for a few minutes. Yarmir slid into one of the abandoned seats and crossed his arms, fixing his captain with a long stare once they were gone. "Well, what is it you want, secret agent?" "Simple. A case of the missing woman, a Misha Ivanov, is closed. She was a suicide case for the KGB. Too much stress and so on. The paperwork is being arranged by our friends, Mr. Petrov. The case of Evgeny Kucherov was an unfortunate accident. An engineer who wanted to play with a new Czechoslovakian pistol and accidentally shot himself very carefully. As for anything else, it will be taken care of, okay? Or else you'll do something. Or, Yarmir, you will find yourself in Moscow explaining to them what's happened. And should you manage to convince them to let you come back here, you will not have a job, okay?" Yarmir did his best to give the look like he wanted to spit at the man. The bile was there, ready to go, but he swallowed it down just to not piss off anybody any further. "Fine. Do you need anything else from me, or am I free to resign?" "Yes, you can resign once you make sure to escort Mr. Gordon to the airport once you've left my office." Yarmir stood up stiffly and threw a terrible salute at his captain before turning and storming his way out the door. Outside, Frank and Sergei had hung out near the doorway to the captain's office. Sergei had taken to smoking a cigarette while confiscating a phone to get some business done with the office. Frank, on the other hand, sat and waited, watching the world go by him and tenderly trying not to move his arm or side so that it wouldn't explode in pain. A few minutes passed before the door angrily opened and Yarmir stepped out. He stopped and stared at Frank for a second and then pointed to him to follow him. With a huff, the detective headed towards the stairs. Frank got up with one last glance at the busy Sergei, and then went after Yarmir. Having led Frank out of the building to the side parking lot, Yarmir came to stop in front of a waiting car. He opened the back door and then moved to the side. "Your ride awaits, Mr. Gordon." "Thrown out of a country for being in the wrong area at the wrong time." "It's far more than that, and don't play about. I can't guarantee your safety. The Soviets and this STB are probably looking for a reason to make a spot like you disappear. I've done nothing to anyone to deserve such harsh treatment, but as you wish, I will leave." Frank, with a hand held up, got into the back seat. Once inside, the door was slammed shut by Yarmir, who then clambered into the passenger's front seat. Inside the car, Frank was surprised that he wasn't alone in the back seat. There was another figure there, though he couldn't see the person as they were covered by a blanket and, from all appearances, was looking away and out the window. The car jerked to life before he could ask any questions, and Yarmir shot him a look to tell him to sit there and not do anything or say anything. They made their way through the morning traffic, keeping pace as they drove to the Prague-Ruzin airport. It took a little while to get there, but they got there in the end, pulling up outside of the departure gate where several burly-looking guards stood. Frank got out of his side of the car, as did Yarmir, and the guards swarmed over to the other side and got the other person out of the car, whisking them away into the airport. Frank could only watch this happen and turned to Yarmir, who didn't look interested in talking. He was merely pointing towards the entrance to the airport, and not even looking at Frank, who found himself heading that way with the detective following behind. Having gotten into the airport lobby just in time to see the guards ushering the covered person into a private terminal area off to the side, Frank stopped, but Yarmir pushed him to keep him moving towards the doorway and not to block people on the entrance. He went forward a step or two and then pointed at the fleeing figures as he turned to face the detective. Any idea who that was? They don't tell me things. Now go get a ticket onto the fastest plane out of my country. Frank grinned and turned and marched towards the nearest counter with a ticket salesperson looking for any customers who wanted to check in. He got in a line and a few short minutes later stood in front of the cheerful check-in lady who beamed at him when he approached. Do you have a flight to Paris? Sorry, no. Milan? Not until tomorrow. Brussels? If you run, I believe we have a flight that leaves in 30 minutes at the very end of the terminal. Fine, I'll take that plane. I'll take that, please. He grabbed his wallet and pulled out a blank check, which he quickly wrote his details on and then handed it over. The attendant went through the motions and soon handed him a ticket. Like I said, the very end of the terminal, and you have about 20 minutes to get to the plane. Good luck. He, of course, grabbed the ticket and ran. The run took him from the check-in counter to the terminal itself, with Yarmir keeping pace behind him just to make sure that he got on the plane. Attention, the 10:30 flight to Brussels is departing in a few minutes. Frank picked up his pace as he raced the final 300 yards to arrive at the check-in counter to slap his ticket down. The attendant took the ticket and nodded and showed him towards the door. The terminal door led to a group of stairs downward towards the tarmac, and Frank was soon hurrying his way across that tarmac to the plane that still had its stairways leading up to it. As he made his way across to it, the engines began to roar to life, and he glanced back to see Yarmir, with his arms crossed, glaring at him from the terminal. With a shrug, a grin, and a wave, he bounded up the stairs and onto the plane. End of Part 5. The end. Thank you for listening.